Hey everyone, welcome to episode 120 of the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I suppose it's really 270 if you count the old 150 under the old format. And I'm your host, Andrew Coates. And I've got a guest. I've been looking forward to talking to Santana Anderson for a little while. And Santana first hit my sights when I was reading bodybuilding magazines 20-ish years ago. And then, my good friend Frank McGrath from Newfoundland, who I went to the gym with, obviously won his IFBB Pro card, winning the Toronto, I guess, whatever the Toronto show was. Anyway, so, and I know, I can't remember if it was a year after or it was shortly after, the next guy came along and won the Canadian Amateur to get his IFBB Pro card. Back when there weren't many Pro cards and they were way hard.
There was only one a year back then.
Yeah,
crazy.
And then it was you in these with a lot less beard and facial hair. Everybody listening, just go to his Instagram, you'll see. And so that was a really big deal. Anyway, so I just remember you in the magazines back in those days. And then, oh God, must have been a year and a half, 2 years ago, somewhere along the lines. All of a sudden, I got this new follower on Instagram. Oh shit, there's that IFBB Pro. So we got to chatting a little bit. We bounced a lot of back and forth over the last while.
COVID. Yeah.
And anyway, it's great to have you on. So obviously, again, IFBB Pro. I want to talk a bit about that. And you're the owner of O2 Wellness, which is a gym in Halifax. So I've got some cool questions there too. So let's actually dive into this. I mean, we see.
Thank you for having me, by the way.
Oh man, I'm thrilled to have you. And these are great opportunities actually to get some face-to-face time and just chat with people. I've said this before. Everybody else, you guys are just like an afterthought. If the conversation is interesting to you, great. This is for me. I'm being selfish. So we see there's a lot of push, and I think maybe young coaches think, well, I got to blow up in the online space. That's the future and everything. And you're the brick and mortar owner. And I mean, I think there's a lot of people who thought, especially during the COVID stuff, well, that's it. Gyms are dead. Talk to my buddy Luca Hosevar. He'll tell you gyms are not dead, right? People still love the in-person experience.
Of course, like you still got to go work out.
You get this sense of all these young trainers wanting to be big online. How does that contrast from the experience of owning the gym and serving the people in person? I want to dive deeper into that experience.
I think there's value to both. You know what I mean? I think the nice thing about online training is you can train or, have program design, get coaching from somebody that normally you would never have access to, which is, so you have an enormous pool to choose from. You can really, you can learn from the best. Doesn't matter where you are geographically. However, there are things that come down to form and critiquing how you work out, or even being able to diagnose whether they're actually pushing as much as they should be during their workouts, that can't really be done online. So I think that there's always going to be a place for brick and mortar gyms, but I do see the value in the online training. But it seems like there's a huge push on it lately. And then everyone who's become a coach then sells a program to become a coach.
That's a whole different thing. That's the rush, not just off the gym floor, but that's the rush to stop working with the clients at all. I mean, I get that for someone who's been in the industry a long time, who has just so much wisdom. Again, my buddy Luke Hosevar is a great example. Pete Dupuis, Mark Fisher. There's a lot of people who are really smart mentors. But by and large, they still operate their gyms, and Luke is still coaching on the floor almost every day. And so I think the people, I don't like gatekeeping in terms of like earning the right, but I think in this particular case, when it comes to, mentorship, I think there's something to that. It's the 23-year-old posing in front of the Lamborghini, they don't own, who's hustling on business cards. That's such low-hanging fruit. I try not to spend any real thought on making So what is it about the physical facility that keeps you wanting to be there? Because we know a lot of people closed their doors, through no fault of their own over the last few years, and then went hard online. My buddy Don Saladino, his lease was up in a Manhattan gym 1 month after COVID lockdown started coming out. He shut it happily, and he moved, and he's done massively well online. So why why still, what keeps the passion for the physical facility?
I think the community. I like meeting with people. I like actually knowing our members. I see a lot of value seeing people in person achieve their goals and start from a certain point. Then you see them a year later and you can look with them what they've accomplished. I think it's valuable in every community to have that type of facility to go to carve out whatever your community is. It's a the social aspect of it as well. That's very important. I think underrated nowadays, especially with everyone being so in on everything being online. Like, I think we're losing some of that personal connection that we used to have.
And how big is your gym? How many members do you have? And like, what's the kind of demographic? Because someone might look at you and be like, oh, he's a bodybuilder, therefore, it's a body,
Yeah,
but I don't get that vibe at all.
not at all. No, we're about 15,000 square feet. We were 24/7 before COVID. Now we close down at midnight, open at 5. We have group studio, classes, full staff of coaches, child minding. So we're serving more of a demographic like in the 30 to 60-year-old category. And I prefer to serve that category, to be honest with you. It seems to be, for one, you know, I think I've not that I've had my fill of bodybuilding and fitness competitions, but it is a different group of people, and not to say anything negative towards them, but it becomes a bit of a toxic environment over time. Uh, so I like helping people that are just new to the gym, or maybe they've been going to the gym for a couple of years and they're spinning their tires. I like seeing those people actually make progress and get closer towards their goals.
I don't work with stage competitors either. I have no history of competition. So for me, it's not an area of interest. It wasn't a passion in any way, shape, or form. My demographic is very similar to yours. I like working with the general population, everyday person,
Totally.
the
Yeah.
old adult, some retirees that I work with. Occasionally I'll work with young athletes over, whatever. I don't coach powerlifters either, but I've got a lot of great coaches and resources around who, let's say I've got someone who either transitions into that world, or like one of my online clients who is local to Edmonton. She's great, really strong, and she developed an interest in powerlifting. So I
Okay.
referred her to my buddy Max Hall, who just opened a gym. He's in Lethbridge, and Max is a really great guy. And then another one of my clients is down in New York. Again, loves strength training, powerlifting style training. And then we transitioned him to get some coaching and work in a powerlifting gym in New York when it came time. And now he's getting ready for his first meet. And for me, it's like, I'm happy to find the right person for them because it sets them up to thrive. And I still engage with both of them regularly. In fact, one of them still
Totally.
me just to pick my brain, despite when I train his son, despite the fact that, I'm no longer programming for him. So again, I think it's just about serving other people. And I mean, here's another thought too. I think a lot of coaches come in and maybe they do the show and they think, all right, well, I'm going to coach competitors. All right. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a great demographic to work with. And it's not to say anything negative about the people. They deserve good quality coaching. But I mean, I think traditionally the clientele can be a bit transient. I think traditionally they bounce from coach to coach. Now, I actually think that's sometimes on the coaches, and I think that's on the way that things always were done, where like the end point is, well, show day and that's it, versus having that, more established relationship. And I think there's a lesson there for coaches. You guys can do better. But again, I don't necessarily think there's a lot of money in the newer, establishing themselves coach in places like powerlifting, bodybuilding, or training athletes, because those people tend to gravitate towards the biggest, names in the industry. So I still think, even if those are your long-term passions, I still think being great with the general population is still a really wise play. And, hey, you do have to, you earn the right to earn a livelihood as a trainer. So, and I think that's a really big thing. And I know you guys, I think Nova Scotia was a little harder on the closures during everything. I know any gym owners would be pissed about this stuff. I remember you were not fucking amused during this. Well,
I think we were closed 8 months out of 2 years, something like that, 8 or 9 months. So
that's bad.
yeah.
I know Ontario, and I think California had the worst. I think they were closed a full year total. And
Oof.
but yet you got through it. So at the end of the day, you talk about community. Is that what kept the doors open? Is the fact that people really wanted to come back?
Oh, I think, yeah, totally. We had a good core community of members. And I mean, there are still members that are hesitant and that haven't come back because of, what happened with the pandemic. But another thing that we did, so yeah, we had a good core community that came back. They were super excited for us to get open. And then we did start to do some advertising and marketing for our coaches to do online training as well during the pandemic. And whether those people were local, across the province, across the Atlantic provinces. So we kept our sales team on throughout the closure, and some weeks we were selling just as much as when we were open.
That's amazing. And that's
Yeah.
forward thinking. That's really smart. I mean, we know that the big chain gyms, well, I don't necessarily have any negativity because I have some good relationships within like the biggest, like we'll call them Good Life within
Yeah.
Canada. But some of them, I think they did try to set up some online systems, but most of these gyms were forced to, furlough their trainers, their staff, and
Mhm.
a local chain that went under, who I try not to name because I used to work for them and we have a very bad relationship. And
Okay.
they continue to charge members. Now, that's a complicated thing because I think there's a lot of gyms where the members, smaller private gyms, were said, "Listen, like we're going to pay because we value this." There's
Yeah,
no.
and we got a lot of that. And so we had a lot of people that reached out and said, no, just keep on charging us. And for the people that did go along, that did do that to try to support us, we added on 3 months to their membership for whatever they paid on the other end.
Amazing,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think it's at the end of the day doing the right thing. The gym company that I contract out of Evolve Strength, Evolve, like moment one, John, the owner, is like, no, suspend payments. That's it. Just like, no, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to be okay. We also have offices with allied healthcare professionals, which, due to the nature of everything as it evolved, they were allowed to stay open. So they're still paying rent anyway. So it actually buffered it. But there was at least one gym chain that ultimately did go bankrupt because I think they were damned if they did, damned if they didn't. And they kept charging people. And then they got some bad press in the
Oh, for
newspaper.
sure. It's going to be awful if you keep on doing that. You can't do that.
And then so of course they're like, oh, well, we'll allow people to cancel if they want to, but it was on the person, and then it wasn't easy to cancel. And
Yeah.
these are complicated conversations, but I think it boils down to a universal, hey, do the right thing for the client first.
Well,
And
especially if you plan on opening it again, these are going to be that's your membership base. So you don't want to really alienate them. You want to, and they understand what you're going through, of course, but yeah, you have to think long term. Like you want these people to come back and not hate you.
did going through that entire experience change anything about how you guys run your business going forward?
Absolutely. I think that we've continued to advertise outside of our geographic region. So we have our coaches coaching clients remotely all over the province through the Atlantic provinces. And it just didn't make sense to shut that off. And a big part of that came from gym launch. So during the time we went through the closure, we were with gym launch, and they had a strategic plan in place for those gyms because we were already set up to do something. It's called hybrid training, so it's not in person. Have you heard of the process before from gym launch?
So I mean, I'm not sure if everybody.
Program design. It's like trainerize. You do program design. You do check-ins 3-4 times a week with your clients, like meaningful conversations, where I would have our head coach audit to make sure all of our coaches were having those meaningful conversations, video check-ins, and just updating their diet, keep making sure that they're progressing towards their goals, updating their programming. So we were already set up for that and doing that before COVID hit. So when COVID hit, we were in a really good spot that I just turned the ads on across the province, in through New Brunswick, in through PEI, and lots of people wanted to still stay in shape after everything was closed. So we gave them a tool to still take care of their fitness during the pandemic.
And it's funny because, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity if you choose to look at it. I mean, how many people just did not know what to do and completely folded? And quite frankly, there's no shame in that because it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
But my buddy Don Saladino, I mentioned. So Don
Mhm.
shut his gym down, and Don's Ryan Reynolds trainer. He's trained half the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And
Okay.
a
It's
long
all
time.
right. That's a good
Don,
clientele to have.
Don has been on episodes. Don's great too. And so he, right at the beginning of all the shit going on, and again, he's in New York,
Yeah.
but he starts moving around furniture and starts filming video, gets his wife, Belle, is amazing, starts filming him doing bodyweight workouts, just basic stuff in their home. And he starts putting this out on his social media. He's already got a pretty good following.
Yeah.
And so he's got a great relationship with Muscle and Fitness Magazine, Men's Health. He's part of those. And so they're asking for these things. And so he starts giving away workout programs, videos for
Mhm.
free for emails. And within the first few months,
That's a good way to build your email list.
hundreds of thousands of email subscribers. Meanwhile, he's serving these people, helping them out for free. And now he's built a massive media business, online
Mhm.
programs, challenges, an app, you name it,
Yeah.
because of the foundations that grew right as he got to shut down his gym. And so you guys did something similar, and you ultimately served.
Mhm.
Not everybody was of the mindset where they wanted to stay in shape, but you
Mhm.
served the people who did. Now, do we ever think this sort of shit's going to ever happen again? God, I hope not. We never know what's the next paradigm shift
Yeah.
position where we never thought that would have happened. And I think it's just proactively going, all right, how do we serve people? How do we help the people that opt in to wanting the help? And you guys are in a better position than ever. So Gym Launch, for anybody who's not familiar, Gym Launch was a company that Alex Hormozy originally founded, him and his wife Layla. And
Mhm.
they did ultimately sell, I think, their majority interest in it. I think they do still.
2/3, I think. They still have a
Yeah,
third
it's a
piece.
part of the portfolio within acquisition.com. And I think everybody, if you
Yeah.
don't know who Alex and Layla Hormozy are, they're everywhere. And so
Mhm.
they're speaking at GymCon, and that's in Orlando later this year. And you're going to be speaking there too, which is cool.
Yeah.
I'm literally on a flight in the morning. So by the time people are listening to this, I'll be back. I'm flying to Coaching Con, and Alex and Layla are going to be there. I was supposed to speak at an event with them in Scottsdale in December called the IFCA, but they had to pull out. So I missed the opportunity to meet them. But either way, I like to meet
They're
you.
great people. So down to earth. Like yeah, they're both very easy to talk to, very easy to get along with. They're definitely people people. They're easy. It's easy to see why they've done so well. Like they're hard workers, they're very intelligent, but they're very courteous to everyone, and they're friendly. They're easy to get along with for sure.
That goes a long way. So there's something within this that you kind of alluded to, and it was a question I was going to ask, is about your philosophy in investing in your staff. And I think I know Pete Dupuis and Alan Cosgrove will both say this, but I think they both attribute the quote to someone before. And it's the saying, and it can be any business owner, but it definitely is the gym owner. Well, what if I invest in the continuing education of my staff and they,
Mhm.
and the response is, well, what if you don't and they stay? So what's right?
That's good. Yeah.
Extrapolate what's going to happen there. So what's your philosophy towards investing in your staff of coaches?
I think it's very valuable. It's important that we try to get to become part of any continuing education that's available. I think there's been a lot that's come down the line through Gym Launch that's given us a lot of coaching to help them understand how to best service their clients from a business standpoint. So, but that being said, yeah, people have to stay up to date. Things change. Like what was true 20 years ago doesn't seem to be totally true today. You agree with that?
Well, God, I mean, how many iconic and influential coaches are there? I mean, I think Charles Poliquin is a really good example. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy is, trained Olympians, legacy, foundational figure on strength and conditioning. But there were some things that he drifted off to later in his career that
Mhm.
ultimately weren't substantiated, or he would still say things that were no longer
Right.
disproven based on
Mhm.
nutritional science or what have you. So yeah, like there's an evolution. How many people in the industry, you and I both came up through working out in the era where meal timing was everything, right?
Yeah.
And you had to have the small, frequent meals to metabolic rate. We now know that's rubbish, but that was that was treated as fact. Like
Oh yeah.
15
Yeah.
to 20 years ago, that was fucking.
And anabolic window right after you work out. You don't miss that. And not that it's like, yeah, like, and I find it's something, especially when I got with my wife, Christy, I was still in some of the mindset of that. She's like, no, no. And then she'd Google and she'd show me. I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, you definitely have to be open-minded because there's lots of new studies coming out all the time. But how do you find it for digging through? Because there's an enormous amount of information out there, right? And there can be reputable people on both sides of the coin. How do you sort through different topics that seem to be coinciding with different viewpoints?
My strategy has always been to identify who are the subject matter experts. And then you sort of have a ranking score in your mind of the level of credibility and reliability. And in their areas, it's very important to know that once the person gets slightly outside of their true area of expertise, you have to be able to. I mean, the ultimate example is, and people love him or whatever, Andrew Huberman, right? His podcast.
He was already on my. I knew you were going to go there.
Huberman, I mean, someone might not like this because they might like Huberman, but I think there's also cherry picking in terms of every once in a while he says something that's so
off. I know Lane Norton called him out on it, right?
Yeah, Lane, and then ultimately Lane got on his podcast, and I think that turned into a very constructive thing. And I'll come back to Lane because this conversation goes. Lane will be involved in down the line. But to me, it seems like Huberman, either he's completely making shit up, or I don't know where he's extrapolating some of these really crazy things because he'll say, "Oh, studies are saying this," and my buddy Dan Feldman just called him out. And he didn't want to be attacking him, but called out something he said about the type of light exposure and something the effect was having. It's like, there's literally no fucking research that like in any way supports this that I can find. So like, it's just like complete fiction. So once you identify that, if someone tips to the point where they're too frequently unreliable, then you kind of have to be really careful with them. And I feel like your Hubermans fall into that category. But then in our industry, the figures we know, when it comes to muscle hypertrophy, Renaissance periodization, Mike Isertel, he's one of my gold standards. He's not the only one. And it's not just pick your hero and your guru.
Brad Schoenfeld.
Schoenfeld, absolutely. I know Brad. I've sat down and had dinner with him. His sister Melody is a close friend of mine. Brad is preeminent in that space. Dr. Stu Phillips. You take the research stuff those guys are doing. You look at a guy like Menu Henselman's really, really smart researcher. You look at Brett Contreras, what Brad is talking about. There are a whole bunch of people, and if you collectively look at what they're saying, Greg Knuckles, and they are reliable in putting out good information, and then you look at the intersections, and are there places where they disagree? Okay, that's going to be really useful too. And then sometimes, all right, is there something that's research-based, but maybe it's not as necessarily applicable on the gym floor? So you have to be careful there. So Lane is one of my gold standards when it comes to nutrition. Do I think he's infallible? Do I think any of them are infallible? No, they all have their biases. But you will find your framework of people who are really strong practitioners of evidence-based training and nutrition. And they're going to be your guiding stars. And then you'll get exposed to more people. Another good example, I noticed that the physical therapy world, they get really, oh God, sometimes they get a little pedantic about the research and what have you, but there's still some really good stuff in there. Like, for example, following the sports physio, Adam Meekins. Now, Adam has taken shots at people I like, and I thought maybe was off base on some of the stuff he was doing. But at the same time, if you look at Adam, very research-based, very evidence-based, and the message around, getting away from the fear of movement and some of the myths and misconceptions about injuries, because Adam is constantly picking at Squat U. So a good example of a resource that I no longer consider to be reliable is Squat U, because there are just too many times where stuff is being put out there that simply is not supported by, or quite frankly refuted by the research that's out there. And anybody listening, it's like, I don't want to be hating on or bagging on some of the people out there, but
for sure,
start treating with a critical lens who our resources are, where are their biases, where are they probably drifting from good evidence-based practice, and people can go in that direction. And I think there are a number of people who have PhDs. I mean, shit, there are some PhDs. I'm not going to say any names, but there's a well-known PhD in our industry who it's all circus training and it's complete and utter rubbish and nonsense. And so, but again, I think that particular example, everybody kind of knows. I'm not going to say a name.
Yeah.
Another example is if you notice that, Mike Israetel and Brett Contreras and a few other evidence-based people are lining up on one side of something. And then there are some people on Instagram and TikTok whose primary delivery vehicle is social media, who are making claims, even if they're making claims based on research, then I'm going to bias towards the people who've got the established track record and credible education in that field. So I think it's important you're careful how you pick your heroes. Even our heroes are not infallible.
For sure.
That's my lens.
What do you think about the over technical stuff on Instagram? Because it seems like there's been a lot of science-based training. Yeah, you know what I mean, where it becomes very particular. And I'm not bagging on those guys or anything. I find some of it valuable, but some of it I feel like could go over people's heads and maybe might not even be quite as important. What do you think of that kind of stuff? Because it seems to be, quite prominent.
I love how you flip this to you. All of a sudden, you're interviewing me, but it turns
I follow.
So first of all, these are good questions. You should probably start your own podcast if you don't already have one. I don't know. So I know what you're talking about. So there's a few dimensions. First of all, there is messaging around, like the word optimal gets thrown a lot, and we have to look at who are the consumers. You and I, in particular, speak to and serve the general population where hyper technical and combative messaging over this stuff is probably doing those people a disservice. It's probably information overload. It's probably creating barriers to them accessing things, overwhelming them to the point where they don't want to step in. So I think it's really important that most people are serving the broader general audience to try to help the person get consistent, get their boots on the ground in the gym, figure out the basics of nutrition and enjoy that. Now, I'm going to explain what's going on. And I've said this before in various different media. There's a push to establish brand and real estate. And a lot of the basic stuff is very well established. It's downtown, whatever city you're in, it's already sort of taken. So you can get out into the bush and in the swamp, in the stuff that is far away from, like, a long drive away, real estate wise, or it's not necessarily as appealing. But some people, like for example, the Liver King is a classic example of someone who branded around such an extreme concept, but yet captured lightning in a bottle in terms of his marketing and blew up, right? And obviously there's a lot of problems with that messaging. But within the industry, there are also people now carving out space as subject matter experts on perhaps more niche things. One of the problems I find is when it gets very combative and sometimes it's outright malicious, it gets vicious, and it turns into fighting. And again, sometimes that fighting goes both ways. I think there's two sides. One is I don't think on the average this stuff is serving the broader community. On the flip side, if those people are clear on who their audience they are serving, and as long as their information is actually good information, then that's fine too. I have this is almost a controversial opinion on something where, I think we know the research and the data on fat shaming is like, yeah, this doesn't help the vast majority, and I won't engage us in this sort of media.
Yeah.
I also am a pretty strong proponent of basically freedom of expression. And while I don't think it's a good tack to take for any fitness professional to engage in overtly fat shaming behavior, I think there's room for that tougher love, no bullshit type messaging. My buddy Tanner Shuck, he's a longtime T Nation guy. He's more like that. And I think there are people out there who would say that needs to go, that needs to be banned, that shouldn't be on media. And I'm like, I don't think that's true, because I think that a certain type of person will self-select to the right message. And that tougher love is exactly what someone needs to hear. Do I think everybody needs to have that rammed down their throat? Hell no. But I'm a big believer that people still should be able, within reason. I mean, anything that's hateful is a no. And this is a broader, complex conversation I won't get into.
Sure.
But I don't believe in, hey, I don't agree with that, therefore it needs to go away. And that's in a microcosm of our industry, but also in kind of a broader sense.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I don't know about when you're posting. I don't think I can. I find it very hard to say something negative about somebody else. You know what I mean? You see a lot of posts out there that are attacking other coaches, and maybe I might not agree, but I think, I don't know about you, but the older I've gotten, like when I was younger, I thought I knew everything. And the older, when I was in my 20s, I knew everything. And then as I got older, I'm like, oh, I really don't know anything. And now the topics have gotten so broad that it's like you realize how little you know about the industry because there's so much out there. So I find it very hard to say anything negative, but it seems like negativity seems to spark interest. It gets attention, but I don't think it's a positive thing for the industry. And I see it a lot.
We see it a lot, but it's also because, as you said, it's what gets attention. People gravitate towards divisiveness, fear, anger, enragement. And that works again on a broad scale across society. But I think if we look at the people in the industry who've done well, especially in the evidence-based space, the corner that we're more or less in, and have taken the positive high road, your Jordan Syatt's, your Spencer Nadolski's, someone like a Jill Coleman. There are so many examples of people who, I mean, I think they also had a really strong foundation of writing, business development, shaping lives, mentorship, public speaking.
Yeah, they have the experience go before social media even comes along.
There's a lot of credibility in that space. So I think that generation, and I think a lot of up and coming coaches are really clued into the fact that you can build a great social media following, but create an impact. And social media following is a way to create impact. And people also get really negative about, oh, blue influencers, what have. Okay, cool. We know there's lots of bad faith actors. We know people fake their followings, but there's a lot of good, real people. And so I don't begrudge that at all.
Yeah.
Yes, I do think that like shame-based, tear down type stuff is common. And there are some people that I like and respect who are very evidence-based who do too much of it. And someone might immediately think I'm leaning towards like Lane. Like Lane, I love Lane to death. And Lane almost uniquely can get on with that kind of bombast. But he's built such a massive foundation of evidence-based information and education that's a part of his personality. I think a bit of a character. I also think that he's backed it up many times over. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is that, well, they think, oh, Lane is where he is because of that. That's a piece of the puzzle. And then people go straight to that kind of behavior without having built all the other foundation. There's where they go wrong.
And with Lane, when I think about the negative stuff that Lane might bring up, it is so outlandish, the topics that he hits on, that it's deserved almost.
Most of the time, yeah. And at least I'd like to put it this way, if you're picking on verifiable charlatans and you're punching, I think there's okay, right? Like, if you're going at if Dr. Mark Hyman's or your Dr. Jason Fung's or your Dr. Oz's, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then those names are big mainstream, whatever. They don't give a shit. So I can say those comfortably. That I think is one thing. But if you're picking on, the little account that, probably is just misguided and doesn't know better yet early in their career, I don't necessarily think that serves anybody either. So
if I think back to 20 years ago, if social media existed like this, I'm sure I would have put a lot of bad content out when you're just getting to learn.
And I'll share something that might surprise people, but the more I see and expose myself to a lot of different perspectives on evidence-based stuff, and especially with some of the more combative stuff, the more that I'm like really careful about even what I say. And sometimes you get fearful of saying a certain thing that, well, someone's going to come in and attack because this particular point's not necessarily supported by, this study, what have you. And it's very natural to second guess yourself and to be worried about what these people will say. But then I cut through that by going, all right, at the end of the day, I'm going to try to share stuff that I think is just generally positive.
And if you give it from your perspective as well, you know what I mean, and from your experience, I think that makes it a little different. That flips it.
And that's a Hormozy thing.
100%. Yeah, yeah, I can't claim it. I've been brainwashed from them since 2019.
Well, I can tell you're
doctor and
their ideas and their systems have helped you immensely. And
oh yeah,
he does say that in some of his media, and I like listening to his podcast. I think it's really good. A lot of wisdom, and it's when you start saying it from this has been my experience, then you're being less authoritative and you're being more experiential, and it's something that, hey, it's like, all right, this makes sense. So I can't necessarily say I do a ton of this because I learned to write yourself out of, like, writing articles for things like T Nation. You write yourself out of it, right?
True.
But so it's a tricky thing to navigate. And anybody listening, if you're sort of confused and you don't know what to do, I mean, listen to the two of us. We've been around this a long time, and we don't have all the answers.
Definitely not.
So here's one thing I wanted to ask you about. I mean, I mentioned that you're an IFBB Pro, and again, it's anybody who's got an IFBB Pro card has earned it. But we know that there's a lot more categories and there's more opportunities now to get it than ever.
For sure.
So when you got it, it was a goddamn big deal because it was rare. Now, I guess the question is, what is the value of the legacy of being an IFBB Pro? Has it changed? And are younger competitors making a mistake in blindly pursuing the IFBB Pro card, thinking it's going to solve all their problems? Or are they going about that in any of your nuanced thoughts about that whole thing?
Well, I think, I think obviously, people are putting way too much weighting into the fact of getting an IFBB Pro card is going to change your life. But I think it was the same 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, I think going pro, I mean, yes, there was a lot of there were some opportunities that opened up 100%, but I think it's going to come down to your personal work ethic. Like, it's not, doors aren't going to fly open the moment that you win a show and you're allowed to compete in a bigger pond with a whole lot of better people. That is going to, for the most part, end up you end up just becoming one of the crowd. So yeah, I think people focus on that a lot, but when it comes down to like the competitive side of fitness, I don't find there's a lot of, I shouldn't paint them all with the same brush, but there's a lot of tunnel vision where they don't think outside of anything other than their competitive career. And then you end up getting a lot of them that become somewhat bitter towards the sport when they're finished. You know what I mean? And yeah, I think you have to keep yourself well-rounded, and competing isn't the be-all end-all for your life. And going pro is definitely not going to change your life. That's for sure.
There may be a dimension to this where when you became a pro, and the way that we consume media about IFBB pros was literally in the bodybuilding magazine. So what ends up happening? The people in there are the top level competitors, right? It's disproportionately your Phil Heaths and your Dorian Yates, go back far enough, and your Lee Priest.
Yeah. I remember having to you have to wait to find out who won the Olympia 4 months later, when the Flex magazine came out. Like sometime in December, the Christmas one would come out and you find out who won.
It's crazy to think about, right? Because now it's like everything's on social media. And I think, well, anybody who is a competitor, pro or not, has far more access to their own distribution of and attention and brand. I think back in the day, it's almost like a parallel when you think about music, where you consume music primarily through, we're Canadians, Much Music, MTV, and the radio station. So you were told what was the big thing. And now we know there's machinations behind the record companies pushing stuff. But I mean, great stuff tend to bubble to the surface. Whereas now you can consume through social media, through YouTube. That kind of started with MySpace, I suppose, for the older ones.
Let's go way back. Yeah.
The way that music's distributed and the way that music's consumed has changed. So the way that these these owners of these bottlenecks of information, they no longer have control over music distribution, over the information distribution. And that's kind of what happened, where the bodybuilding magazines were no longer that
relevant
source of information about what was going on in this world. So we got a proliferation of more cards, more attention on these people. But I still think it boils down ultimately to the people with the brandable personalities, the people who keep showing up, who've got the legacies. And again, I look at someone like, again, Frank McGrath being a really great example of someone who's still relevant today. Frank is a fun, he's got this like chill, low-key sort of demeanor. He's got this humility about him.
Awesome dude. Yeah.
Iconic physique. And I mean, like, guy, he's walking around as a 20-year-old looking like a pro bodybuilder.
Right? Well, it doesn't even make sense. You look at his forearms and everything. Yeah.
Best
Do you know Dave Miller from Newfoundland?
Dave Miller. That name does not ring a bell. So weirdly enough, I left Newfoundland 17 years ago, and while there's people in the fitness community there who I know, I mean, I don't have much of a foothold there.
But he's from Newfoundland as well. Really good bodybuilder, and he was around Halifax. I think he's still here. But his calves are like Frank's forearms were. Yeah, just doesn't stand to reason.
But I remember there was a guy, Eric Fankhauser was the guy with the
famous
back in the old days,
right?
Yeah,
I remember those, the black and white pictures, the three of them, him and Ben.
Yeah, everybody else listening is gonna be like, "Who the hell is that?" But
yeah, exactly.
Little inside thing between us two old fans of bodybuilding. So let me get myself back on track here. I still think the lesson comes down to being of service to people. I think you can build a brand around stuff. I'm big on brand building. You know, again, that's a Hormozy thing. I think I came to that independent of Hormozy talking about it because he had a major pivot where he sort of tried to hide in the shadows and didn't want the attention. And they realized, wait a second, we can do a lot more with being forward. That's why
I remember him telling us that it didn't matter in 2019.
So, I mean, anybody listening, do I think you need to lean into a big social media brand? Absolutely not. I think that if you keep showing up and if you are of service to the people who are in front of you, and along the way, if you're interested in doing things that scale service, which is writing or building business out in a way that serves more people, or creating other forms of media, and it can be short form social media, but I think you want to go deeper. Maybe it's the podcast. And I'm listening to Lewis House's new book. And if you look at people like the people who blew up big on podcasting, Tim Ferriss, Lewis House, Rogan, sure, Rogan had a bunch of other stuff, but in a very significant way, they were of that generation. They got really big because they became masters of media distribution and gaining attention and audiences. So there are a lot of different ways you can do this. I think it's, hey, don't just like dabble in something for a month. Hey, this is not working, and quit. I think it's show up and serve for the long run. And I think there's a lot of capital and credibility in being a successful physical facility owner. Do I think everybody needs to run out and start a gym? No. But I still think it can be done. I think it can be done really well. And there's an embedded message within what you've been saying. It's have good mentors. You know, develop great systems. You obviously been, it's almost like a gym launch commercial because you know, but yes, you can tell you believe in them because, you know, when you made it through, 8 months of closures.
Absolutely not. No.
And it's, and again, I'm very picky about who I bring on this podcast, who are business mentors. But again, why does Luca Hosfart keep coming back? Why do I got my buddy Pete Dupuis coming up soon? Why has Mark Fisher been on before? And, there's a handful of other people who are really great. Jill Coleman, she's not a gym owner, but, coaches mostly women in the online space. These people are proven in this sort of realm. So it's funny because, again, it feels like you flipped this conversation back around to me and I talked a little more than I like to.
Well, I was interested to talk to you because I love the content. I soak up all your stuff. And no, I appreciate you having me on to be able to chat about things.
And there's something else here too. And I said this about the person I highlight the most with this, I've had him on a couple of times, is Jade Tata. And I spoke at an event recently with Jade. And if you ever get a chance to meet Jade or you listen to the podcast with Jade, Jade has a skill above and beyond almost anybody I've ever met to make things about you flip it to you, make you feel important. He's just magic with it. And I noticed that I'm not surprised that you've had the success in the realm that you've had, because I can already tell you have a genuine curiosity about other people, easygoing, good natured, and that's something you can't fake. So everybody listening, pay special attention to that particular thing, because I do think it comes naturally, but I think it can be developed as a skill to be more attentive to just listening to other people. So Santana, man, it's been great to have you on. Where can people find you on social media to kind of dig into more of your stuff?
I guess I'm on Instagram, Santana Anderson 02, and O2 Wellness. That's my gym, our Instagram. So you find anything that I put out will be on there.
Beautiful. Well, anybody listening, especially if you're a physical gym owner, into the bodybuilding world, or just really enjoy, an experienced coach, go follow Santana, dig into what he's doing. My longtime people support the people I bring on here, please. And if anybody's picked up this episode from your media, well, I'm from the East Coast too, St. John's, Newfoundland. I know you can hear a bit of your accent. I don't have the accent.
When I go home to the town I grew up in, it gets way worse after about an hour.
Especially if there's any alcohol involved. But I mean,
Oh yeah, 100%.
honestly, you guys got to go just look at Santana's profile. Like, you are jacked and you are ripped. Like, to this day, like, you got your pro card. Was it what, 19, 20 years ago? How long have you had it?
2010, so 13 years ago. When I started competing in 2002.
Okay, so all right, there we go. So it like, that skews my memory on this stuff, but so it's still a long time ago. But you look every bit the part of a pro bodybuilder to this day, and I'm not aware that you have done any shows in recent memory either, have you?
2016, the year before I opened the gym or started building out the gym. And then there's this, I've gotten older and I'm not interested in going down that route anymore, but I'm here every day, so there's no excuse, right?
Absolutely. But anyway, just go check out the physique, right? That's pretty cool. You can own the gym and keep yourself in tip-top shape too. But anybody, if you're finding my work through Santana, scroll through my list of guests. You might really enjoy Don Saladino, who I mentioned, Luca Hocevar. They've both been on fairly recently, and maybe you'll stick around and subscribe. In the meantime, if you're someone who has not ever given me a review, but you're a longtime listener, don't do it while you're driving, but because a lot of people listen while they're driving. But if you remember, a review would go a long way. I appreciate it. You can always shoot me messages if you have questions. And guys, thanks for taking the time to tune in. Santana, it's been a real pleasure.